The Weight of the Badge. A story of duty and forgiveness on the dying frontier. The Man in Chains. The stage arrived in Redemption Flats on a Tuesday morning, carrying dust, 2 passengers, and a ghost from Sheriff Jacob Mercer's past. Jacob stood on the boardwalk outside his office, coffee cup in hand, watching the coach roll to a stop in front of the hotel. He was 46 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes, the kind of lines that come from squinting into harsh sunlight and harder truths. The first passenger to descend was a traveling salesman, his suit rumpled from the journey. The second was Deputy Marshal Tom Brennan from the Territorial Capital, his badge catching the morning light. And the third, stepping down in shackles with his hands bound before him, was Daniel Crane. Jacob's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. His hand trembled slightly, though whether from anger or shock or something more complicated, he could not say. 15 years. 15 years since he had last seen that face, and yet he recognized it instantly, even aged and weathered as it was. Daniel Crane, the man who had destroyed Jacob's life. Marshal Brennan spotted Jacob and raised a hand in greeting, then began walking toward the sheriff's office, his prisoner shuffling beside him in chains. Jacob set down his coffee cup carefully, as if it were made of the thinnest glass, and waited. "Sheriff Mercer," Brennan said as they approached. "I need your help." Jacob's eyes never left Crane's face. The man looked older than his 42 years, his once confident bearing replaced by something more cautious, more humble. Their gazes met, and Jacob saw recognition there, followed immediately by something that looked like resignation or perhaps regret. "What kind of help?" Jacob asked, his voice flat. "I'm transporting this prisoner to Fort Collins for trial. Bank robbery and assault. We were supposed to have an armed escort, but there's been trouble on the northern route. Apache raiders, they say. I got word this morning that I need to wait here 3 days until a cavalry unit can provide safe passage. And you want to use my jail. That's part of it. But there's more." Brennan lowered his voice, though Crane could clearly hear every word. "There's also a gang looking for him. 4 men, maybe 5. They were partners in the robbery, and they want him dead before he can testify against them. They've been following us since Denver. I need protection, Sheriff, and I need it from someone I can trust." Jacob felt the bitter irony of the situation settle on him like a weight. Daniel Crane, who had once been his closest friend, his brother in all but blood, needed his protection. Daniel Crane, who had courted and won the woman Jacob loved, who had married her while Jacob was away fighting in the war, who had taken everything Jacob had dreamed of that man, now needed Jacob to keep him alive. "Please, Jacob," Crane said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken, and hearing his voice older, rougher, but still recognizably, his sent a jolt through Jacob's chest. "I know I got no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway." Jacob looked at the shackles on Crane's wrists, at the lines of hardship on his face, at the plea in his eyes. He thought about saying no, about telling Brennan to find another town, another sheriff. He thought about all the reasons he was justified in refusing. Then he thought about the badge on his chest and what it meant, what it demanded. "Bring him inside," Jacob said finally. "We'll talk. Ghosts and choices." The jail cell was small but secure, with iron bars that Jacob had reinforced himself when he first took the position 5 years ago. Crane sat on the narrow cot, his shackles removed now that he was safely locked away. Marshal Brennan stood near the wood stove, warming his hands while Jacob remained by his desk, maintaining distance. "I appreciate this, Sheriff," Brennan said. "I know it's an imposition, but the territorial governor takes a personal interest in this case. Crane here has information about a wider network of bank robbers operating across 3 territories. His testimony could help us shut down the whole operation. So he's cooperating," Jacob observed. "Fully. He's already given us names, locations, patterns of operation. In exchange, The prosecutor is recommending a reduced sentence 10 years instead of 25. More importantly, he gets to live long enough to serve it, assuming we can keep him safe. Jacob's eyes moved to Crane, who sat quietly, not meeting his gaze. What about his family? The question came out before Jacob could stop it, and he cursed himself for asking, for showing that he knew anything about Crane's personal life. Brennan glanced at Crane, then back to Jacob. Wife died 4 years ago. Fever. There's a daughter, 14 years old, living with relatives back east. Part of why he is cooperating wants to give her a father who faced up to his mistakes instead of running from them forever. A daughter. Jacob absorbed this information, adding it to the complex mathematics of his feelings. Sarah had given Crane a child, had built a life with him, had died in his arms. All things that might have been Jacob's in another version of the world. The gang that's hunting him, Jacob said, focusing on practical matters. How close are they? Close enough. We spotted them twice on the journey here, once outside Denver, once near the Carson River crossing. They're being careful, waiting for the right opportunity. 4 men, maybe 5, led by a fellow named Pike Garrison. Mean, smart, and patient. The kind who'll wait for the perfect moment to strike. And you think that moment will be while you're here. I think they'll try. Small town, 1 sheriff, me with my hands full keeping watch on a prisoner. From their perspective, it's as good a chance as they get before we reach Fort Collins with a full cavalry escort. Jacob moved to the window, looking out at the main street of Redemption Flats. It was a modest town, perhaps 300 souls, built around a crossroads that saw enough traffic to sustain a few businesses, but not enough to attract much trouble. He had chosen this place precisely because it was quiet, because it allowed him to do his job without the complications of his past intruding. So much for that. I'll need to know everything about these men, Jacob said. Descriptions, weapons, patterns of behavior. And I'll need you to stay in town, not just drop the prisoner and leave. I'm not going anywhere, Sheriff. This is my prisoner and my responsibility. I just need backup from someone who knows the town and who I can trust to do the job right. After Brennan left to check into the hotel, Jacob found himself alone with Crane for the first time in 15 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with history and unspoken words. Finally, Crane spoke. I don't expect forgiveness, Jacob. I know what I took from you. Jacob turned from the window to face him. You took nothing from me. Sarah made her choice. She chose you. She waited for you. Waited over a year after the war ended. When word came that you'd been killed at Shiloh, she mourned you. We both did, but I wasn't dead. No. And when you came back 6 months later and found us married, Crane trailed off, shaking his head. I saw your face that day, saw what it did to you. I wanted to explain, to make you understand that we thought you were gone, that we grieved for you, but you were already leaving. Rode out that same night and never looked back. Jacob's jaw tightened. He remembered that night with painful clarity. The shock of arriving home to find Sarah wearing another man's ring. The numbness that had settled over him as she tried to explain through tears. The look in Crane's eyes, guilt, defiance, something that might have been an apology. And his own response, mounting his horse and riding into the darkness, away from everything he had fought to return to. That was a long time ago, Jacob said quietly. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Doesn't mean I don't carry it. Crane stood, moving to the bars. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, Jacob. Marrying Sarah wasn't one of them. I loved her truly. But how I went about it, not being straight with you, not waiting to be sure you were really gone, that was wrong. I've carried that weight for 15 years, and now you've added bank robbery to your list of regrets. Crane's expression darkened with shame. After Sarah died, I fell apart. Started drinking, gambling, making bad choices. Lost our farm, lost my way. The robbery seemed like a solution to my problems, but it just created worse ones. And now my daughter has to live knowing her father is a criminal. At least she still has a father. Robert Mackenzie's children don't. Crane looked confused. Who? A deputy in Silverton who died during a bank robbery. Left 3 kids orphaned. The men who robbed that bank probably told themselves they were just taking money, that no one would get hurt. But people always get hurt, Crane. Always. I know that now. That's why I'm testifying. That's why I'm cooperating. Can't undo what I did, but maybe I can stop others from doing worse. Jacob studied the man before him, no longer the confident, charismatic friend of his youth, but someone worn down by loss and poor choices, trying to find a path back to something resembling honor. He felt the pull of old affection, warring with old anger, duty, warring with desire for revenge he had thought long buried. Get some rest, Jacob said finally. It's going to be a long 3 days. The siege begins. The attack came on the second night, but not in the way Jacob expected. He had spent the intervening time preparing, sleeping in shifts with Marshal Brennan, boarding up windows, checking sight lines, making arrangements with a few trusted townspeople to watch for strangers. The waiting was its own kind of torture, made worse by Crane's presence, a constant reminder of everything Jacob had lost. They talked, despite Jacob's intention to maintain silence. Crane spoke of his years with Sarah, their struggles to make the farm work, her final illness. He spoke of his daughter Emily, her intelligence and spirit, his desperate hope that she might have a better life than he had given her. He spoke of his descent into crime with a candor that surprised Jacob. No excuses, no justifications, just a plain accounting of how one bad choice had led to another, until he found himself holding up banks with men he didn't trust. Pike Garrison is the worst of them, Crane said. Smart and cruel in equal measure. He'll have a plan, something clever. Won't just ride up shooting. Jacob had been thinking the same thing. A direct assault would be foolish. Too many variables, too much risk. Garrison would look for an advantage, a way to improve his odds. The advantage came in the form of fire. Jacob smelled smoke first, pulling him from a light sleep in the chair by his desk. He was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Flames licked at the general store across the street, climbing the wooden walls with terrifying speed. Fire! He shouted, grabbing his hat. Outside, other voices took up the cry as townspeople emerged from their homes. The store owner, Henry Walsh, stood in the street in his nightshirt, staring in horror at his burning livelihood. Jacob's instincts screamed trap, but he couldn't ignore a fire. It could spread to the whole town if not contained. Brennan, he called. Stay with the prisoner. Don't open that door for anyone but me. Understood. Be careful, Sheriff. Jacob ran toward the fire, joining the bucket line already forming from the town well. The flames were fierce, fed by dry wood and what smelled like accelerant. This was no accident. He scanned the crowd, looking for unfamiliar faces, for anyone watching instead of helping. The second fire started 10 minutes later, a stable at the edge of town. Then a third, at the church. The pattern was clear now. Spread the chaos, divide the town's attention, create opportunity. Jacob ran back toward the jail, his heart pounding. He burst through the door to find Brennan at the window, rifle ready, and Crane standing at the cell bars. 3 fires, Jacob reported. Coordinated. They're trying to draw us out. It's working, Brennan observed. Half the town is running around with buckets. Perfect time for a small group to slip in unnoticed. Or for one man with a rifle to set up position while everyone's distracted. As, if summoned by his words, the window shattered. Not from gunfire, but from a rock wrapped in paper that tumbled across the floor. Jacob picked it up, unfolding the note with fingers that had steadied through years of practice. The message was brief. Send out Crane, or we burn the whole town. You have 1 hour. Jacob crumpled the paper, his mind racing through options. Brennan looked at him with grim understanding. They won't stop with the fires, the marshal said. If we don't give them what they want, people will die. You can't let them dictate terms, Jacob replied. You give in to this, every lawman in the territory becomes a target for intimidation. And if I don't, this town burns. From the cell, Crane spoke quietly. Let me go to them. It's me they want. No reason for innocent people to suffer because of my mistakes. Jacob turned to face him. You'd be dead before you walked 10 steps. That's not justice, it's execution. Maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe it is, but that's not for you or me or them to decide. You agreed to stand trial, to testify. That matters. The law matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Jacob moved to the weapons locker, pulling out a shotgun and a rifle. He handed the rifle to Brennan and kept the shotgun for himself. We hold this position. The fires will burn out eventually, and when they do, Garrison loses his advantage. Unless he's willing to kill townsfolk to draw us out, Brennan said. Then he becomes a murderer, and every lawman in 3 territories will hunt him. He's a thief and a criminal, but he's not stupid. He'll push, but he won't cross that line unless he's desperate. An explosion shook the building, not close, but loud enough to rattle the windows. Jacob swore and moved to look outside. The general store's roof had collapsed inward, sending a pillar of sparks into the night sky. Jacob, Crane called from the cell. Let me talk to them. Maybe I can negotiate something. Buy time. There's no negotiation here. Garrison wants you dead. The only question is how far he's willing to go to make that happen. Another rock came through the already broken window, this one carrying a more ominous message. 30 minutes. Then we start shooting anyone who comes near the fires. Their blood is on your hands. Jacob felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His duty was clear: protect the prisoner, uphold the law. But his duty was also to protect the townspeople, the ordinary men and women who had done nothing to deserve being caught in this conflict. He thought of Mary Chun, who ran the boarding house and made the best dumplings west of San Francisco. Of Henry Walsh, watching his store burn, his life's work turning to ash. Of young Timothy Brooks, barely 16, enthusiastically volunteering for the bucket line, not understanding the real danger he was in. These were his people, his responsibility. Brennan, he said slowly, if I asked you to trust me, to let me handle this my way, could you do that? The marshal studied him for a long moment. Depends on what your way looks like. I'm going to go talk to Garrison, face to face. If he wants leverage, I'll give him leverage me instead of burning buildings. Buys you time to get help from the cavalry post, only 40 miles north. That's suicide, Sheriff. And it doesn't solve the problem. They'll just kill you and come for Crane anyway. Maybe. Or maybe Pike Garrison is smart enough to know that killing a sheriff brings heat he doesn't need. I'm betting on his self-interest. That's a dangerous bet. Jacob checked the shotgun's load, then set it aside, making a deliberate choice to go unarmed except for his sidearm. Everything about this situation is dangerous. But I took an oath to protect this town. That includes protecting it from being burned to the ground, because I was too rigid to find another way. Crane gripped the bars of his cell. Jacob, don't do this for me. I'm not worth it. Jacob met his eyes, the eyes of the man who had married the woman he loved, who had built a life in the space where Jacob's life should have been. The man he had every reason to hate, and yet couldn't quite manage to. I'm not doing it for you, Jacob said quietly. I'm doing it because it's my job. Because these people trust me to find solutions when there are no good options. And because 15 years ago, I ran away from hard things instead of facing them. I'm too old to keep running. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Brennan, you keep this door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me or the cavalry. 3 days isn't so long. You can hold out that long. And if you don't come back, then you make sure Crane lives to stand trial. Make sure his daughter gets a father back, even if it's one fresh out of prison. Make sure something good comes from this mess. Jacob stepped into the night, into smoke and firelight and uncertainty, and began walking toward the largest of the fires, where he knew Pike Garrison would be watching and waiting. The long night. Jacob found them at the burned-out shell of the stable, 4 men standing in the shadows cast by the dying flames. They were exactly the type he expected, hard-faced, well-armed, carrying themselves with the casual confidence of men accustomed to violence. The tallest stepped forward, and Jacob knew this was Pike Garrison. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair and eyes that missed nothing, a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His gun hand rested on his belt, close to his weapon, but not threatening. Yet, "Sheriff Mercer," Garrison said, his voice surprisingly educated. "Kind of you to accept our invitation. Wasn't aware burning down my town constituted an invitation. More of a demand, I'd say. Semantics. The point is, you're here, which shows you're a reasonable man. I appreciate reasonable men." Garrison gestured to the ruins around them. "This is unfortunate. Could have been avoided if you'd simply handed over what doesn't belong to you. Crane is a federal prisoner awaiting trial. He belongs exactly where he is. See? That's where we disagree. Crane belongs to us. He was our partner until he decided to save his own skin by selling ours. That kind of betrayal has consequences." Jacob kept his voice level, his posture unthreatening but not weak. "Those consequences are called justice, Garrison. Crane broke the law, and now he faces trial. That's how civilization works. You know this. Civilization." Garrison smiled without humor. "Big word for what we have out here, Sheriff. Law is just whoever has the most guns in a given moment. Right now, in this town, that's us. Right now, maybe. But you harm one person in this town, any person, and you become a target for every lawman in 3 territories. You're thieves now. Kill a civilian, you become murderers. That's a line most men don't cross unless they plan to run forever. Who says we're not already planning that? Because you're too smart. You've made good money robbing banks. Probably have it stashed somewhere safe. Kill innocent people here, and you'll never spend a penny of it without looking over your shoulder. The law might be slow, but it's patient. It catches up eventually." Garrison studied him with what seemed like genuine interest. "You're not wrong. Which is why I'm going to make you a counteroffer. Give us Crane. We'll take him far from here, deal with him quietly, and you never see us again. No more fires, no harm to your townspeople. Everyone goes home alive except one man who made his own choices. Can't do that. Can't or won't. Both. My job is to uphold the law, not trade lives to make my job easier. That badge on my chest means something, Garrison. It means I hold the line even when it's hard. Even for a man who destroyed your life?" The question hung in the air, and Jacob felt his chest tighten. Garrison had done his research, knew about the history between Jacob and Crane. Of course, he would use it as leverage. "Especially then," Jacob said quietly. "Because if I can protect a man I have every personal reason to hate, then the law means something real. If I only uphold it when it's convenient, when I like the person I'm protecting, then it's not law at all. It's just preference dressed up in fancy words." Garrison was silent for a moment, and in the firelight his expression was unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You're either the most principled man I've ever met or the biggest fool. I honestly can't decide which. Those aren't mutually exclusive." A short, harsh laugh. "No, I suppose they're not." Garrison turned to his men, exchanged looks that Jacob couldn't interpret, then turned back. "Here's what's going to happen, Sheriff. We're going to camp just outside town, close enough to watch, far enough to avoid an immediate confrontation. You've got until dawn to reconsider. If Crane isn't handed over by first light, we'll come for him. And when we do, we won't be gentle about it. You come for him, people will die. Maybe my people, maybe yours, but someone will die. That blood will be on your conscience. I gave up worrying about my conscience years ago, Sheriff. Question is whether you can live with that much weight on yours." Garrison tipped his hat mockingly. "Dawn, Sheriff Mercer. Think carefully." They melted back into the darkness, leaving Jacob standing alone amid the smoking ruins. He waited until he was certain they were gone, then made his way back to the jail, his mind churning through impossible options. Inside, he found Brennan and Crane, exactly as he'd left them, the marshal alert and armed, the prisoner standing at the bars. Crane's face was drawn with tension. "Well?" Brennan asked. "They've given us until dawn to hand him over. After that, they attack. Will they really do it? Risk everything for one man?" Jacob moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee he didn't want, but needed something to do with his hands. "Yes, because it's not really about Crane anymore. It's about reputation. They let him testify. They let one partner betray the others with impunity, and their organization falls apart. Every criminal in the territory will know they didn't protect their own. It's bad for business. So what do? We hold. Ives sent word to the cavalry. Post should reach them by morning if the rider doesn't run into trouble. If we can hold 12 hours, maybe less, we'll have reinforcements." Crane spoke from his cell, his voice heavy with guilt. "All this because of me. All these people at risk because I made bad choices and worse friends." "You're right," Jacob said bluntly. "This is because of your choices. But that doesn't mean I'm going to hand you over to be killed. Not because you deserve protection, but because the law deserves respect. You understand the difference?" "I think so. You're protecting the principle, not the man. The principle is what holds us together, what keeps us from being just animals fighting over scraps. I've seen what happens when principle dies. I saw it in the war. Saw men do terrible things because there was no law to stop them, no moral center to hold them back. I won't be part of that. Not again. Not ever." Jacob settled into the chair by the window, rifle across his lap, preparing for the long hours until dawn. Brennan took up position by the back door. Between them, Crane sat on his cot, a man whose past mistakes had created this moment of crisis, whose future depended on two lawmen willing to die for a principle he had never honored himself. The night stretched on, measured in coffee and vigilance, and the small sounds of a town trying to sleep while surrounded by threat. Jacob's thoughts drifted, despite his efforts to stay focused, memories of Sarah's laugh, of Crane as he had been before everything changed, of the war and what it had taught him about honor and duty. He had come to Redemption Flats to escape his past, to build a life defined by quiet competence rather than dramatic choices. Now his past and present had collided, forcing him to confront the question he had been avoiding for 15 years. Could he forgive? Could he let go of the anger that had shaped him, the sense of betrayal that had driven him to this remote posting? He looked at Crane, dozing fitfully on the cot, and tried to find hatred, tried to feel the righteous anger that would justify refusing to help. That would make this easier. But all he felt was a tired sadness for what had been lost, what could never be recovered, and a grudging respect for a man trying, however late, to face his mistakes. "Jacob," Crane said quietly, and Jacob realized the man wasn't sleeping after all. "Whatever happens at dawn, I want you to know I'm sorry for all of it. For Sarah, for not being honest with you, for every choice that led to this moment. I'm sorry." Jacob didn't respond immediately. What was there to say? Sorry didn't undo the past, didn't restore what was lost. But maybe it didn't need to. Maybe acknowledgement was enough, admission that wrong had been done and regret genuinely felt. "I know," Jacob said finally. "I believe you. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite, but it was something. A small step on a long road, the only kind of progress that ever really mattered." Outside, the eastern sky began to lighten, the first pale gray of approaching dawn. Jacob checked his weapons, settled his hat, and prepared to face whatever the new day would bring. The siege was ending. One way or another, before the sun rose high, this would be finished. The choice at dawn. They came as the sun broke the horizon, 4 riders emerging from the purple light like specters. But they didn't charge the jail with guns blazing. Instead, Pike Garrison rode alone down the main street, his hands visible and empty, stopping 30 yards from the jail door. "Sheriff Mercer," he called. "I'm here to talk one last time. To offer you a choice." Jacob stepped out onto the boardwalk, rifle held loosely, non-threatening but ready. Behind him, Brennan watched from the window, covering his back. "I'm listening. I've been thinking about what you said. About conscience and consequences. About the line between theft and murder." Garrison's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "You are right, killing civilians would bring heat we don't need. But we also can't let Crane's betrayal stand unanswered. So what are you proposing?" "A compromise. We ride away now, leave your town in peace. In exchange, you tell us where Crane will be transported and when. We'll take our chances on the road, away from innocent people. Clean fight between us and the law, no civilians caught in the middle." It was, Jacob realized, as close to honorable as a man like Garrison could come. An admission that he wouldn't cross certain lines, wrapped in a request that preserved his reputation while limiting collateral damage. It was also impossible to accept. "Can't do it," Jacob said. "You know I can't. I give you that information. I'm complicit in whatever happens. That makes me no different than you." Then we're at an impasse. No, we're at a moment where you have to decide who you really are. Jacob took a step forward, his voice carrying conviction. "You're a thief, Garrison, maybe even a good one. But are you a killer? Are you willing to gun down a sheriff, a federal marshal, maybe some townspeople, just to silence one witness? Because that's what it will take. We're not giving him up, which means you have to come through us." Garrison sat silent on his horse, and Jacob pressed the advantage. "You've made money. You've survived when others haven't. That takes intelligence and planning. Don't throw it away now for revenge dressed up as necessity. Ride away. Find another score, another opportunity. Live to make a different choice. And let everyone know that Pike Garrison backed down. Let everyone know that Pike Garrison was smart enough to recognize when the cost outweighed the benefit. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." The moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then Garrison smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a hell of a talker, Sheriff. You ever consider a career in politics?" "I prefer honest work." A genuine laugh this time. "Fair enough." Garrison gathered his reins, preparing to turn away, then paused. "One thing, Sheriff. What you said about protecting a man you hate because the law matters, I think I understand that. I don't agree with it, don't share it, but I understand it. There's a kind of strength in that. The stubborn, foolish kind, but strength nonetheless. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." "It was meant as one." Garrison tipped his hat. "We'll be moving on." "But Sheriff, if I ever hear that Crane didn't stand trial, that he got away somehow, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be so reasonable. He'll stand trial. You have my word. From you, I believe that actually means something." Garrison rode back to his men, and after a brief conference, the 4 of them turned and headed south, disappearing into the sunrise. Jacob watched until they were gone, then let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Inside the jail, Brennan lowered his rifle. "I'll be damned. You actually talked them down." He talked himself down. I just gave him the excuse he was looking for. Jacob moved to the cell, looking at Crane. "You've got 9 days left on your journey to Fort Collins. 9 days to prepare yourself for trial, to figure out what you're going to say to your daughter when this is over." Crane gripped the bars, his eyes wet. "Thank you, Jacob, for my life, for everything." Jacob studied the man who had once been his friend, his rival, his ghost. He thought about Sarah, about the years of anger he had carried, about the weight of grudges and the freedom in setting them down. "Thank me by making it mean something," Jacob said quietly. "You stand trial with dignity. You tell the truth, all of it. You serve your time and you come out a better man. You be the father your daughter deserves. That's how you thank me, by proving that second chances matter, that people can change, that the law I'm protecting is worth the trouble. I will. I swear I will." 3 days later, the cavalry escort arrived 20 armed soldiers who would ensure Crane reached Fort Collins safely. Marshal Brennan shook Jacob's hand with genuine respect. "What you did here, Sheriff, that'll be talked about for years. You held the line when most men would have broken. Just did my job. It was more than that. You chose principle over personal revenge, law over expedience. That matters." After they left, Jacob stood on the boardwalk, watching the dust settle. The town was already recovering. Henry Walsh was rebuilding his store with help from neighbors. The stable was being reconstructed. The church would be repaired by Sunday. Life continued, as it always did, finding ways to grow in even the hardest soil. Doc Morrison joined him, the old physician whose wisdom Jacob had learned to value. "Heard you had quite a week, Sheriff." "You could say that." "Also heard it involved Daniel Crane. Must have been hard, protecting the man who married Sarah." Jacob considered this. "It was, but also necessary. Not just for the law, but for me. I've been carrying anger for 15 years. Let it define me in ways I didn't realize. Having to protect him, having to put duty ahead of personal feelings, it forced me to let some of that go." "And have you? Let it go?" "Some of it. Maybe not all, but enough. Enough to sleep better, I think. Enough to stop running from my own past." Jacob smiled slightly. Redemption Flats. Hell of a name for a town where people come to escape their mistakes. But maybe that's what redemption is, not erasing the past, but learning to live with it, to build something better on top of it. Doc Morrison nodded sagely. "Wisest thing I've heard in months, Jacob. You should listen to yourself more often." As evening fell, Jacob made his rounds through town, checking doors, greeting residents, maintaining the quiet order that was his purpose. The stars emerged one by one, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the night. Jacob thought about Daniel Crane, riding toward judgment and a chance at redemption. He thought about Pike Garrison, choosing to walk away rather than cross a line he couldn't uncross. He thought about himself, standing at the border between the past and the future, finally ready to step forward. The frontier was dying, giving way to railroads and telegraph lines and the steady march of what people called civilization. But in these final years, in small towns like Redemption Flats, there were still moments that tested what men were made of, still choices that defined character and shaped legacy. Jacob had made his choice. He had upheld the law not because it was easy, not because he liked the man he was protecting, but because the law itself, the principle of it, the idea that justice could transcend personal grievance, mattered more than his own pain. It was a small victory, perhaps, measured against the vast canvas of the American West. But small victories were how the world changed, how civilization was built, how broken men found their way back to wholeness. Jacob Mercer, Sheriff of Redemption Flats, stood on his boardwalk under infinite stars and felt, for the first time in 15 years, something close to peace.